All right. I am here with Dr. AJ Kumar, who is going to be our next scientist spotlight. And AJ, could you start by introducing us by telling us about your current job? What are you doing and how you maybe came into that job?
Sure. So thanks for the opportunity to speak with your class. So my current job is as the chief scientific officer at a startup company called Jana Care. And what Jana Care is doing is we're trying to create point of care affordable diagnostics for chronic diseases like diabetes and heart disease and kidney disease, and pair that with management tools that can be used sort of anywhere in the world.
Awesome. So, what do you mean by a management tool?
So we actually build a app for the smartphone. So say you're a diabetic, the doctor tells you that, you have this disease and you need to eat better and you need to be more physically active and good luck. Right. Um, so at that point, you don't see the doctor maybe for 6 to 12 months, and you have to try to figure this out. Our app, which is called the Habits app, is sort of built to be a digital companion, essentially, during that time between doctor visits. So it provides, tracking tools to track your sugar, track your weight, track your activity and what you're eating. Provides educational material to teach about what the disease is and how what things different work with your body and how these things relate to things, and even sort of real life context, like how do you deal with the stress of eating out if you're a diabetic, or say a birthday party, what do you do? And then it all ties into our diagnostic platform, which is a small device that plugs into the smartphone to do a variety of different blood tests.
Cool. So before I ask you more about that, which I definitely do want to do, you are a physicist by training, right? So can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about how someone with a PhD in applied physics gets involved in the medical world?
Yeah. So I kind of got involved reluctantly in the medical world, I'd say. I grew up surrounded by medical doctors. My parents are medical doctors. My grandparents are medical doctors. My sister and my brother-in-law are both medical doctors. Um, but I was always interested in physics because I was interested in sort of understanding more deeply like how the world worked and on the sort of fundamental level. And through college, I got interested in just the sort of the bench work, building stuff and just the tools you build as a physicist.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of what physics is about figuring out how to see signals in a bunch of noise.
Mm.
Um, and after undergrad, I spent 2 years in the Peace Corps, where I was working with mostly in education, but in a rural setting where you get exposed to all kinds of things, including healthcare. Um, and when I came back to grad school, I was trying to figure out how do I combine my interest in physics with my interest in sort of development.
Mm.
And I sort of felt like healthcare and healthcare technology was a way where I could use that sort of principle of finding signals in the noise from physics, to find signals about people's health uh, in a way that could be more accessible, more affordable, um, and sort of to help people out in other settings. So that's sort of how I got into diagnostics, which I did my PhD on,
Yep.
and then eventually got me this job.
Awesome. So before my students watch this video, I'm going to have them watch your Harvard Horizons video. So
Okay.
um, they will have, I'm recording this ahead of time, so I'm speaking in weird future tenses, but
Yeah.
um, can you give us an update on what has happened with that project since then before we get back to your current work?
Yeah. So the work on the sickle cell diagnostic, um, it was spun out from Harvard and was being developed by another startup company, not this one that I'm at now. I stayed involved as a consultant. Unfortunately, that company went under recently. But despite that, uh, I was able to put together this ragtag team of people that really cared about the technology.
Okay.
And just a month ago, we completed a follow-up study in Zambia, where we took sort of an improved version of the test
Okay.
out, and this time we went out to a rural clinic in Zambia. So not the big hospital in Lusaka, but to a rural clinic. Spent 2 weeks there, and they did screen about 500 kids for sickle cell disease.
Cool.
And so they're really sort of trying to put it to the real use case.
Okay.
And so the anecdotal correlation between sort of clinical symptoms and our test results look pretty good. We're still waiting to get the final results. We had to take dry blood spots, which are sitting in a freezer right now, waiting for some paperwork to be done before we get them processed here in Boston.
Yep.
And then we'll be able to see the real correlation and how the tests perform. But we are optimistic we have good results. So that technology is still alive. We're trying to figure out how to commercialize it successfully and who the new partner is going to be. But it's still there, and we're still working on it.
Cool. But that is totally separate from your current main job.
Yeah, that's what I do in my free time.
In your free time. All right, sounds good. So, in your current job, what does a typical day look like for you? What are you actually doing on a regular basis?
Yeah, so it's changed a lot in the last 2 years. Right. 2 years ago when I joined the company, it was a group of 12 of us total in the company, and I was the only one in the U.S. Everybody else was in Bangalore, which is where we have our sort of big operations and our first market.
Yep.
So I was really setting up the lab from scratch at that point. Mm-hmm. So I hired my team. I had to find lab space, set up a lab. So I was doing a lot of reading, a lot of brainstorming and strategic, thinking about what are the diagnostics that we need for diabetes, heart disease, kidney disease, and these other diseases.
Yep.
What's already out there? What are the shortcomings, and sort of what would our strategy be once we get, and then what equipment do we need to do that?
Yeah.
So a lot of that first year was sort of strategic, and then buying equipment, hiring people.
Yep.
And now we have a team. There's 5 of us here in Boston, so it's a small team, but it's a pretty efficient team. We have lab space and a lot of equipment, and we've been working on 2 different biomarkers in the last year and a half. One that we're really pushing right now to try to get into the market end of this year, early next year. So what I end up doing is sort of managing research. I actually don't spend as much time in the lab, which makes me a little bit sad sometimes. But I sort of work with my team of scientists and sort of figure out what are they each doing in the day.
Yep.
What's the general scope of experiments? What are the answers we're trying to get to? And how do we get to there efficiently? And what are the resources we need to get there? And I try to make sure that my team has the resources they need to get there.
And are those experiments related to coming up with new diagnostic tests that would be part of the little device you have that goes in the cell phone?
Yep.
So the idea is that this device would do a number of different diagnostic tests from a single blood sample.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, we're making some upgrades to the device itself for one of these tests right now.
Okay.
To incorporate some new detection modalities. So it really is a broad scope. We do everything from chemistry on the strip, thinking about the biology of, interference with different blood samples.
Yep.
And then also the physics of, what's the device and the optics and the electronics behind it.
Yep.
And trying to marry all those sciences together. I mean, that's, I think, one of the key things about science is that the disciplines is kind of a human imposition.
Yes.
In nature, science is all one thing, right? It's all together. So that's sort of how we try to approach it as a team.
So how have you built a team that can do that when so much of our science education system is in these different silos? Are you looking for a unique type of person that has this interdisciplinary approach, or are you looking for people that represent the different disciplines that work together?
So part of it is about finding a team that complements each other, and that is excited about what they don't know.
Yeah.
And I think there's some people in the sciences they only care about their little subset and they don't really get excited about the other stuff. But, one of my guys, Jeremy, he's, has 20 plus years, experience in this field. He's worked at all kinds of companies before I got him into our company. And, he's a biologist by training.
Okay.
And, did his PhD at, BU, and has made immunoassays since before, I was like in high school. But he is super excited about the device and the optics and electronic stuff that we do. because he sees it as enabling the biology to do more and see more things. And so I think he gets that. And so that was a good part of the team. Other team members, I really look for not necessarily, I look for sometimes a specific skill set.
Mm-hmm.
So that I was looking for somebody to do enzyme work. So I found a guy that was, had a background working with enzymes, but not in a diagnostics case. He was sort of doing it in a more chemistry, like looking at sort of the activity of enzymes in a very chemical sort of chemist approach in his master's thesis. But from how his mentors talked about him and from what I saw of him, it was clear that he was really just a problem solver, right? He knew the enzymes well, but he cared about the science to learn everything he didn't know. And then figure out how to solve a problem. And that's the thing I think I look for the most in the team. So that we can all, what are our backgrounds that gives us a specific angle, and then we bring different lenses to the problems we solve. And by having those different viewpoints in one team, we hopefully come up with a more efficient and interesting solution than we would if we're all just one type of scientist.
Interesting. So based on where you're sitting in the medical profession, how do you see medicine changing in the next 10 years or so?
I think there's a couple of different big things that are going to be shifting in medicine. The one that I'm closest to, because it's one of the things that we're trying to push in Jana Care, is the decentralization of medicine. Right now, I think you see there's a lot in hospitals, right? They're like the epicenter of all healthcare. And it's just really costly in the US, especially. Every time a patient's in a hospital, even an outpatient, it's extremely expensive to the whole system. But most of the disease that you could take care of is often preventive. It's often nutrition and lifestyle based. And the more you can do there, the better you can prevent other issues. So part of being able to do that well is about having good information. So being able to do remote surveillance and also being able to coach people remotely and sort of do this sort of distributed healthcare model. So we're really trying to push and create new tools for that at Jana Care, and others are doing this as well. It's not just us. There's a lot of people moving on this. And there's a lot of awareness in the medical field, I think, that this kind of decentralization needs to happen and is going to happen in the near future. And it's going to change and hopefully make healthcare better and more available to all kinds of people.
Cool. So with all that in mind, do you have advice for someone at the undergraduate stage who is considering maybe a career in medicine based on what you see being the newest exciting things or these changes?
I would say, if you have an interest in medicine, understanding sort of what part of the medicine makes you excited is really important. Because if it's about the human interaction, then there's so much about the anthropology of medicine that's important. And all this lifestyle behavior change stuff, which is thinking about how do you change behaviors, especially in a decentralized healthcare system, that could be really interesting. If you're interested in medicine, but you really get excited about the biochemistry, right? Then, there's ways to think about either pharmaceuticals or about diagnostics that are, I think really interesting. And so I think realizing that medicine is just really diverse and not just one thing is important. And then figuring out what's that part of medicine that makes you passionate and excited is really important.
I think that's great advice. And I think that's part of the reason why I wanted my students to hear from you, because you are so involved in this world, not as a doctor or a biologist.
I work with a ton of doctors. On our, we have doctor investors, like people in the venture side of it. We have doctors who are advisors from cardiologists. People help us design we work with nutritionists, and we also work with laboratory clinicians, who basically, one of my favorite guys, he's spent part of his time in the Army in their medical units and testing out point of care systems for them. And now he runs one of the labs at Children's Hospital. So there's all kinds of doctors, and they all have, very interesting and different perspectives.
But that's interesting too, just the idea that maybe someone is going to go the traditional medical school route and become a practicing physician, but they can still be involved, even if they're not an engineer designing the types of tools you're doing,
Mhm.
they can still be involved in that process.
Yeah, definitely. Right.
Um, okay, switching gears a little bit. So I think it's easy for undergrads to see really successful people and not be able to envision themselves at that same stage. But hearing about overcoming adversity can help. So would you be willing to share either a failure story with us or something, a challenge that you had to overcome somewhere along the line?
Yeah. So I think a really good story actually is from my PhD. um, about sort of if you guys have seen the sickle cell talk, that sounds like a great success story, right? In the sense the way that it was all worked out so nicely. But before that, I had a great failure in my PhD. I was actually working on malaria diagnostics first.
Okay.
So the same idea with a density-based system, but the idea was that with malaria, a parasite infects red blood cells, and as it digests protein, it makes the cell less dense, so they float.
Okay.
So sort of the reverse of the sickle cell test. And I was, set up a partnership with people at the School of Public Health, and we were, I was going over there, spent about a year and a half on this project, and then realized that, I had a fundamental mistake in the sort of biological understanding of the problem.
Okay.
And it has to do with the specific species of malaria and the fact that really sort of more mature parasite, which had the biggest change in density, was not going to be in a finger prick of blood. It'd be sequestered in the body.
Okay.
Some, the biology like that species gets, makes its cells sticky, and it's evolved into interesting ways, right? And so it's one of these things where if I'd asked the right question to my biologist partners at the beginning, we could have cleared that up and probably saved us a year and a half of work. But later, it was only like a year and a half in when we were having these discussions, and I was like, oh, wait, this is really bad.
Right. So that's the downside maybe of working across disciplines, is that
right.
these things that, because that's not your area of expertise, you understandably don't.
Yeah. Oh, and there's so many papers published even on things that are just terrible ideas because it's somebody from a different field that crossed over and just had this interesting idea and got something published, but it doesn't actually make sense when you talk to someone that's a specialist there.
Yeah.
So actually, that was one of the decisions we had to make, because I spent all this time on that project, and I had drafts of papers. We probably could have published something. It wouldn't have been very high. It would have showed something, but it wouldn't have been that great. Would have gotten in some journal though. And I could have tried to figure that out and figured a way to salvage that for my thesis, but I had to make a decision a year and a half in my PhD that I was just going to blow it all up and start over again. With a different problem.
How did you make that decision? I mean, that's got to have been, in hindsight now, it probably seems like, obviously, move on to something that you can really solve. But from that point, it must have felt like such a huge setback to walk away from a year and a half.
It was incredibly frustrating. And I think there's a couple of factors that made it easier to make that decision. One was, when me and the postdoc that were working on this project and, began the work, he'd actually left by the time I was at this decision point, but we had so many different ideas about applications. We had a number of different things we looked at. And this was the one we thought was most exciting. So there was other things we could look at. It wasn't clear to me how exciting they would be.
Okay.
Somewhere in this process, I met this doctor, Tom Stossel, who is one of the guys that connected me with all the people in Zambia. And he was a hematologist. And she sort of saw this and was like, had said to me basically, it's like, why are you working on malaria? There's so many malaria diagnostics. There's nothing for sickle cell.
Interesting.
Like, your thing will work for sickle cell. You should do that. So I had that in the back of my head. That there was something else out there that might be interesting. But I think the other big thing was, I had gone to grad school after Peace Corps and really wanted to do science for an application that was useful. And I wasn't necessarily interested in just getting a big bunch of publications to become a professor, and just to publish for publishing's sake. So that was sort of one of the biggest things. I had to sort of sit at the end of the day and look in the mirror and say, can I look at myself and be happy with publishing something that I'm not happy with, and that I don't believe in? So yeah,
that's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. how big, widely spread is your device, and what, I guess, where do you see, is this something that you think you're going to be doing for the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Are you like, what's the next big step for your current project?
So with Jana Care, our device is actually currently in the field in use as a product in India and a couple other countries, but mainly in India. We have over 2,000 devices in use.
Okay.
Some are with sales reps, or like from pharmaceutical companies that go and do diabetes screenings. Some are with clinics or with healthcare workers.
Okay.
There's about 300 clinics at this point using our system and tests. We are, hoping to do a couple of things. One is to take the tests that we're developing in my R&D team here in Boston and get them into products and get them out into all these clinics that are using our other device already and our other products. So that's one of the big things I want to try to be doing in the next 2 years. And then sort of expanding our footprint to not being hundreds, but being thousands, to tens of thousands of clinics around the world. And really show that we can make a successful business out of doing healthcare that's affordable.
Yep.
We want to
Are you looking at clinics primarily throughout the developing world, or do you see a place in the developed world for this as well?
We definitely see a place in the developing world as well. We had good partners in India, and that's one of the reasons we went there first. And it's also one of the hardest testing grounds, 'cause, like, the price sensitivity there is so crazy. It's easier if you make a thing that can sell in India at a profit margin. It's definitely going to sell everywhere else in the world at profit margin.
Okay.
But if you start with a U.S. product and go the other way, it's almost impossible to make it work.
Okay, interesting.
So that's sort of one of the reasons we did that.
Yep.
We are looking to come into the U.S. We're currently in the process of trying to get into Singapore and some other higher paying markets. Because there's a lot of use cases for this in developed markets too. In Singapore, you have a huge amount of diabetes.
Yep.
And you want to be able to go out and screen an entire population because the government has the ability to do that kind of thing in that country that's that small.
Yep.
In the U.S., you have a vast country with lots of rural areas.
Yep.
And like a VA medical system that takes care of veterans that are spread out over, a vast swath of, a rural area. Being able to, have patients. I mean, I grew up in South Dakota, so my parents were in the VA, so their patients would be driving 200 miles for an appointment. If they could go maybe 50 miles instead, or even like have something at their home to do some testing on a regular basis, they only have to come in once a year maybe, instead of coming in a couple times a year.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So there's, I think, a couple different cases where we could be useful in both places.
Awesome. Let's see, I've already asked you for your advice for undergrads. I think that's all really fascinating. I think you maybe more so than some of my other interviewees. I would imagine a lot of my students are going to have questions. Is there a way that I can connect them with you if they do have follow-up questions or just want to follow your progress or learn more? I mean, I can give them the Jana Care website, but is there anything beyond that is a good way?
Yeah. You can check the Jana Care website. I'm happy to answer if there's specific questions by email. Okay. Maybe kind of slow, just because with the baby and everything, will depend on when things happen. But but I'll try to answer any questions by email.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think that's it. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I appreciate your time. And I think my students will really enjoy hearing about your work.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I'm happy to be part of this.